Okay, good afternoon. So we're lucky enough to have the lunchtime session. So I'm guessing everybody's really motivated and full of energy. Welcome to our workshop on embracing standardization for innovation, with a particular focus on the challenges and the opportunities for micro, small, and medium enterprises. I'm quite unclear what the audience is made up of. So I don't fully know where all of you as the audience are coming from here. So this will be quite an interactive session. We are going to be doing some Q&A and asking questions of you and asking you to ask questions of us. And it would be useful when you do if you could give an indication of who you are and the kind of organization you're from, because that will help us as we go through the workshop, perhaps tailor the message a bit better to the audience. My name's Dan Biles. I am Chief Commercial Officer of Unify Technology. We're a specialist AI company who operate in the healthcare sector and environmental monitoring. We monitor water quality, for example, in the UK, helping predict things like E. coli, enterococci, norovirus, etc. I will ask my co-chair in a moment. Co-chair.
No, go ahead.
I'll ask my co-chair in a moment to introduce himself. I would also like to introduce our two gentlemen from UCAS who will be speaking. Do you just want to very quickly say your names? Sorry,
Elias Refoul, Standards Council of Canada.
And Steve Randall from the United Kingdom Accreditation Body.
So after the introduction, they're going to be giving a 10-minute presentation on accreditation. And I am just going to ask a couple of other people in the room to stand up. We have people here from BSI, the British Standards Institution. If you could all stand up and wave. And I think we have some people here from the Standards Council Canada. If they are here, could they stand up and wave? So these are the absolute experts. These are the people to grab afterwards for anything that we fail to get across successfully during the workshop. Phil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's great to have so many people here to talk in a little bit more depth about standardization and maybe ask some questions. By way of background, my name is Phil, head of AI policy at Armilla Assurance. Our company uses model evaluation software that we've developed to evaluate the quality and reliability of AI products and ultimately to sell insurance products. We just launched a warranty for AI products. So the standardization space is quite relevant to what we do in terms of assessing AI products, organizational readiness to adopt AI, risk management. And just to share a little bit more about myself and where I'm coming from, I initially in my career worked at an international standard setting body in aviation. I had no idea that I'd be working in AI 4 or 5 years after that. But I was introduced to standardization at an international level in that experience. When I got to AI, it wasn't very clear to me, this is about 5 years ago, how any of this would be relevant. And in fact, even though there were some initiatives underway, even at that time, at the international level, I wasn't thinking about it. I'm in Canada. There were some early initiatives at the national level that SEC was undertaking to help businesses understand how standards might be relevant for data governance, a lot of data issues. And AI has kind of crept up a little bit over time. And I've learned a ton. I'm still learning all the time. And I just say that as background because I think everybody, individuals, organizations, I think we're all kind of somewhere on this journey. Inevitably, we're going to have to understand a lot more. And we benefit, whether that's from a regulatory standpoint or compliance standpoint. But there's also a lot of questions about what type of value, commercial value, innovation value standards can bring to your businesses today. And then as citizens, as members of the public, standard development is really where, if you were part of the last session on I forget if it's down the hall or up the stairs or both, but values and ethics and norms that people care about, that AI is impacting. These are really the forms in which those rules of the road for businesses are being set, and this is increasingly true as different governments are looking at standards as potential compliance tools. So there's a whole, those of you who have seen standardization evolve in a variety of industries have seen this time and time again. But there are a lot of real policy considerations that are now being decided by in standards committees, with a lot of pros and cons. Some of the pros are that people get to, if you're participating, you get to have a say in really a lot that is related to the public interest, but also to the commercialization of AI. So maybe a little bit more background than I anticipated sharing, but I just wanted to kind of level set and with a bit of an introduction, I think that I hope others will, as we move through Q&A, and this is really meant to be a pretty informal time to stand up, say something about what you think or how you understand standards, talk about your company, talk about your organization, ask a question, and just to keep this informal and a bit of information gathering for everybody here. So thanks so much for participating. I know it is lunchtime. There are still people coming in. That's great. As much as possible, if we're able to kind of congregate in the, let's call it the middle kind of section of this room, that'll be great. So we can keep it an easier environment to engage in. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm just going to start with a few icebreaker questions for you, the audience. Now, we did have a very clever technical approach where you were going to be voting on your phones and seeing cool things up here. Clearly, there wasn't a standard for that, so it hasn't worked. So we're going to do the old-fashioned way of hands in the air. First question is, put your hand up if you can confidently state you know what we mean when we talk about standards in this context. I'm glad to see BSI and SEC, after a brief pause, putting their hands up. Perhaps it's not that surprising that most of the other people in the room didn't feel confident. You're probably worried I was going to pick on you and ask you to define standards. Don't worry, I wasn't going to do that. Regardless of what organization you're from, and for this purpose, perhaps BSI and SEC don't need to put their hands up because they'll skew the voting. How many people here in their organization or their job have actually used standards of some sort, used or implemented some sort of standard? Very few. 1, 2, 3. A few over there. I'm guessing that they were predominantly non-AI standards. Would that be right? So these things like 9001, 27001. Put your hand up if you have actually implemented or used an AI standard of some sort. Yeah, that's really not a surprise. 1/2, that's quite interesting. Maybe later you can tell us what you mean by that. And I'm guessing, based on the relatively low use of standards here, to the answer to the next question, which is that anybody here, apart from the standards bodies, been involved in the standards making process? No. Excellent. We do have one. OK, that's really, really interesting. But you're here. And I'm assuming you're here because you've got an interest in standards, the standards making process and the use of standards. So again, I'm going to do this quickly, so get ready with your hands. I'm curious to know what your motivations are for why you're here wanting to learn about standards. So I'm going to ask a few things, and it's just, does this apply to you, yes or no, hand up. Firstly, are you here because you think standards can help improve the internal business processes of the organization you work for? That there's a benefit to your business? That's really positive to see those hands going up. How many people here think it's more about external, or in addition to that, external interoperability with customers, with partners, being able to just take as read that data is interoperable, for example? OK, that's interesting. So more people are here really for the internal business processes than perhaps the benefit of standards when it comes to interoperating externally. So those are the kind of the carrots, the good reasons for doing standards. How many people are here? They view standards as a bit of a nose, a bit of a pain, but we have to do it to take part in procurement, etc. So it's a hurdle to overcome. Oh, I'm delighted to see no hands going up. Surprised. And similarly, there are people who are here because they see this as a requirement for regulation, for conformity assessment. Hand. Not many. Oh, that's really interesting. So what I'm getting from this is an audience of people who have not, on the whole, been that involved with the standards process before, but they see that standards can provide a benefit to their organization in terms of internal business processes, and they're here for positive reasons rather than what you might call negative reasons of, I don't want to do it, but I have to. That's really positive. And I have to say, slightly surprising, but awesome. So I think it's probably time to move on to a presentation from about accreditation. You have some slides. Oh, I was probably supposed to have that up while I was talking, unless that's
Probably.
your slide.
That's not my slide.
Okay. So
Let's see if this works. Nope.
yep.
That's
Have you gone too far?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
go backwards. You need to give it, sorry, it pauses slightly.
mine. That's mine.
Okay.
Well, afternoon, everybody. I've been asked to just give an oversight on what accreditation is. I think talking to my colleague from SEC, we hear the words certification, testing, accreditation. Quite often certification and accreditation is interchanged, but for us as an accreditation body, it means something specific. So just by way of introduction on us as an organisation, we were created in 1985. 1995. We came from an amalgamation of different departments. The British Computer Society, and over time, laboratory testing. But UCAS was formed in 1995, and we accredit organisations, conformity assessment bodies. And as you can see from there, we are quite a large organisation. So about us as a UCAS and accreditation. So what is accreditation? Fundamentally, it is an attestation of an organisation or people doing a particular task, saying that they are undertaking that competently to give the market trust in the activity. So some of the areas that we work in terms of accreditation, management system certification, somebody's already mentioned 9001. We assess certification bodies against a standard called 17021, and that is about confirming that those organisations, certification bodies, can undertake assessments or audits of organisations to 9001, and they do it in a competent manner. I've put on there about 42001 is obviously the management system that is coming through the process. If that gets to be accredited, that will be done against 17021. We also accredit laboratories, testing laboratories. We do forensics under that. So that is assessing a laboratory to ensure that they are completing tests in an appropriate way and that it's being done competently. Underlying the whole process of accreditation is impartiality as well. The organisations have to be conducting these activities in an impartial way. The third item up there, and we do other areas as well, but the third item up there, product, process or service. So a television might be tested to a standard, and an organisation can put a mark on that to say that it fulfills that standard. We would accredit a certification body to be able to do that activity competently, and it's all about competence. And the underlying item that we look for is the object of conformity assessment. So they are different. The object of conformity assessment for a product certification body is the actual product itself. If there's a process, when we are looking at the process, whereas management systems is against the organisation. Areas that we're actually involved in or getting involved in, into new areas, digital identity. We are working with our government departments. Some of it's supported by supports regulation, others it's just voluntary. So 42001, the AI management system that's coming through. We're having some very interesting conversations with organisations about dual certification for management systems and product certification. That is not necessarily, you only need one, because management systems may form part of a product or a process certification. So online safety, that's something that we're just getting involved with, the online safety bill that's coming through in the UK. We are in discussions with our regulator to work with them. It's based on regulation, but we can also do that under accreditation if appropriate. Just to put it in context where we sit, in the same way as there is ISO, an international framework, there is also IAF and ILAC. ILAC look after the laboratory side of it, and IAF look after certification, so product, personnel certification. And within the the EU. Although the UK left the European Union, we are still part of the European structure, still part of EA. So EA is the body that looks after accreditation bodies within Europe, and they are associated with the IAF. UCAS happens to be members of both organisations. So that is a brief introduction to accreditation. Thank you. And I will hand over to Elias, who will then take you on to what is certification.
I don't really need this. Thank you, Steve, for the introduction, conformity assessment and accreditation. I think it's very important that you set the context, and particularly what I'm about to present. So again, I'm Elias Rafoul. I'm the Vice President of Accreditation Services at the Standards Council of Canada. You'll probably know that Canada is a very active player in the AI space. Canada is one of the world leaders when it comes to a number of AI startups, when it comes to research in the space, and a lot of general business activity supported by the federal government. In fact, AI is one of the top priorities of the federal government today, and to that end, SCC has been very fortunate to receive funding to support our artificial intelligence standardization activities. We're building an artificial intelligence accreditation program, and we're utilizing something called a regulatory experimental sandbox, which allows us to bring in different stakeholders in the ecosystem, from regulators to conformity assessment bodies and end users, so we can try out different things before we actually build the program. There are many benefits to this, of course. One of the main benefits is understanding the regulatory needs of the stakeholders. So regulators, what are they expecting to get out of this? And boosting consumer confidence. There's a lot of confusion, I think, of what AI is and what it's not. How do you regulate it? How do you verify, test artificial intelligence, etc.? And one of the other benefits is, of course, developing a certification scheme in support of small and medium-sized enterprises. In Canada, our economy is based on 99% actually of, much like I think our Australian colleague yesterday mentioned, of our enterprises in Canada are comprised of small and medium-sized enterprises, which are defined to be less than 500 employees per enterprise. So in this example, you'll see different players. There's SCCs involved, that's the accreditation body. We have a regulator that's involved, conformity assessment body, in this case it's Ernst & Young, and an organization in the financial sector called ATB, which is Alberta Treasury Branch, I believe. What's important here is, if you look at the use case, we are the accreditation body, and we're accrediting to ISO standard, that's the management system standard 17021-1. The conformity assessment body, which is EY in this case, will accredit to ISO IEC's 42001, which is artificial intelligence management system. And they'll also incorporate a certification scheme by Responsible AI Institute. Amanda, if you just want to say hello to Amanda's with us from Responsible AI Institute, if anyone has questions about the scheme specifically. So we all have different value propositions, what we're trying to get out of this experiment here. Before we launch the program, obviously for SCC, it is around expanding our stakeholder engagement. It's de-risking our program development, making sure we're building the right program. For the conformity assessment body, well, the regulator too, actually, the value proposition for them is to try to figure out, do they regulate? If so, how? Do they incorporate, how does 42001 actually work with some of their own risk assessment tools, et cetera? And finally, for the conformity assessment body, okay, we've tried this in the financial sector. Is 42001 transferable to other sectors, healthcare, transportation, aerospace, et cetera? So there, and then finally, for the end user, the AI developer, the value proposition is building trust, of course, and confidence that they can effectively manage their AI applications, whether they're built in-house or they're purchased. The sandbox that we're using here, obviously we're going to be sharing some of our findings. I think it's very important that we operate in an open and transparent way. I think there are many parties that are interested, including other accreditation bodies. We'll be sharing those findings, and those findings will inform, I think, the way we develop our programs and be foundational pieces for a successful AI accreditation program. Thank you.
Can I just add one other thing? That last slide that I put up about the international structure, I think the important thing, and I know Chantal brought it out in another talk that we were doing earlier, is this recognition across the world of these different standards. The whole basis of the IAF and the EA is to have a peer evaluation process between the accreditation bodies to actually get equivalence when they're implementing the standards, so that it hopefully prevents organisations having to go to more than one certification body or accreditation body. It doesn't always happen, but that is the aim of IAF, is that accredited once or certified once, certified by one organisation will be recognised everywhere else.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I just want, actually, before we move forward, I wanted to open up to questions about any of the two presentations that we just had. We kind of dove right in a sense, to accreditation, which is an extremely important piece of what we're talking about when we begin a conversation about AI standardization or assurance. But it can be technical, and it's a whole other world. A lot of logos that you've probably never seen before. And an architecture of governance and the international kind of sphere of how all of this is working in different countries. So I suspect you may have some questions about either the two presentations. So I'm not seeing too many hands, but I know you didn't understand everything. Anybody? Nobody? No. We're gonna just start picking on people, and I'm not afraid to do that. Okay, so as we get into our next section, we could I don't know if we don't have slides for the next section, but before we start discussing some of the strategies or opportunities for small businesses, for other organizations, I thought I'd just go a little bit deeper into some of the questions that I've been confronted with as I've worked with a couple of different startups, again in Canada, but often looking at what is available, what's happening at the international level, because as has been mentioned before, Canada is a country of small and medium enterprises when it comes to technology and other industries in general, and we really rely on exporting. So we need to be aware of what's happening in other markets for other businesses, customers, to consume our products. So as I said, I've worked at a couple different AI companies. Currently, Armilla is in an interesting situation because we can play a role in helping companies align. I'll use a flexible word like align with different frameworks. So we have a keen interest in understanding the standardization landscape, opportunities for our customers to align with them, to understand that how we do. So maybe I'll just start there. For me, currently I work at a company that is, we're 12 employees. Armilla Assurance. Anybody ever heard of us? Two people. Well, I know you guys. Thanks very much. But when Elias was talking about some of the leading startups in Canada that are now making an impact on the global stage, he wasn't talking about Armilla just yet, right? So no one's really heard of us, and we are purporting to play a role in helping to verify the quality and reliability of AI products. So why should people trust us? They never heard of us. We're a new company, opened up a couple of years ago. Why should they trust us? One of the reasons that they do trust us is because we have taken steps to look at what types of international standards, independent standards that we can rely on to found claims about what we're doing, how we're looking at or inspecting a product, assessing a product. And sometimes that is based on international standards. Sometimes that is looking at the Responsible AI Institute's assessment framework. But really, we need to leverage other people's frameworks for people to trust us. So there's not some tools and methods that a bunch of people have kind of cooked up in a basement in Toronto, right? So and we want to, and this becomes more and more important as we start working with bigger companies. When we're working with companies of our size, this doesn't always come up. The stakes aren't as big. People are very much in a growth stage. And the calculation of risks is a little bit different. When you start selling to large companies, and they have a different risk tolerance, which is usually quite lower, because the stakes are higher, and they need to see more of this from you as a small business. They need to see how you comply with different information security standards. People are familiar with those. You've probably heard of ISO 27001 or SOC 2, or if you've in a company that has had to sell to one of these businesses, you've worked with an external service provider that makes sure that you're aligned with these. There's OneTrust or Vanta, so people are familiar with this. This is where we're moving with artificial intelligence, right? Companies are going to be requiring AI vendors to prove that they're trustworthy, both as an organization and in their practices, and that their products actually work. We talk to a lot of clients who've been buying poor quality AI products, let's say, for the last 5 years, and they want to have an independent verification that not just about risk, not just about bias or discrimination, but is this actually going to perform as the vendor represents in all the contexts that we might want to use this in? How do we know? So standardization, this is where standardization can reduce friction to commercial scalability. If you're selling to vendors, if you're selling to enterprises, even more important. So these are some of the ways that, let's say on the commercialization front, on the innovation front, voluntary assurance front, standardization has become very, very, very important to our company, and we see it all the time with all the companies that we work with. We work a lot in the HR space. This is a recruitment software, automated decision-making tools. Responsible AI Institute has a working group that facilitates conversations about best practices in this domain to try and build a specific assessment for those types of products. This is one of the sectors where regulation is now requiring some of these assessments or maybe even conformity assessments to take place. And often standards can or will underpin these assessments. So it's becoming more of a regulatory consideration, even in North America. And in the EU, of course, I wish I had the slide from a report from the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission that takes the Chapter 2 high-risk obligations of the EU AI Act, and I'll just make up some of them, but I'm quality management, risk management, fairness, a lot of the kind of principal considerations, and maps out all the different standards that could be relevant to self-assessing that you've actually met those requirements. So some of the discussions you're hearing at this conference are about, what are those standards? Which ones am I going to have to self-assess against to obtain the CE marking? So, there's the commercialization and assurance, proving the quality of what you're doing or your organizational practices, your trusted business partner. And increasingly, we're getting into a space where regulation is requiring these otherwise voluntary exercises. So we haven't talked a lot about specific standards, the names of them, and then we could, say fun things like ISO, IEC, 23894 risk management, and you won't remember any of that. But just know that there are a number of standards that are already published, many more that are in development that do cover, in an AI-specific way, risk management for AI, quality management for AI, governance of AI, treatment of bias, assessment of robustness, very AI-specific standards. And there are also, and I'm reminded of other ones that I don't know of all the time, because this is I think one of the challenges for SMEs is to keep track of all this. But Chantal, who runs Standards Council of Canada, she asked me this morning, so as your company, Phil, you must be using the ISO standard for validation, verification and validation of AI, verification and validation, full stop. And of course, I said, of course. Right? Of course we're following it. And then I went to go look it up, right? So, but there are non-AI specific standards that require some work to apply to a new context, but that are relevant and that can help promote, frankly, and help improve your internal processes and what you're doing in your company, and then justify why a customer should trust you in this very new space. Okay, so I just thought I'd begin by, I did more than begin. I think we're a little bit further along than that. But I might just turn it over to Dan and see if he has any other remarks to help, elicit some questions that you may have, because this is really also supposed to be about your own journey and understanding where you might be able to plug in as a small business, a startup, an organization, individual, whatever your considerations are. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Absolutely. So just a little bit about our journey and how we've been finding our way through the standards landscape. So Unify Technology is an even smaller and younger company. We're only 6 strong, founded in 2019. And I think we're probably quite typical of SMEs, where we've never had the bandwidth to be able to sit down and think, what are the nice to haves? What are the things that can benefit us? We're still scrabbling with the stuff we have to do if we want to be selling in the markets that we want to sell in. And we picked some tough, highly regulated markets. The water sector, there's a lot of regulation, especially when it comes to things like drinking water. There's a lot of regulations. Interestingly, the water sector has a lot that's more regulatory, perhaps, than standards-based. But the interplay between regulation and standards, of course, is a fine one. But then we also accidentally fell into the medical device landscape during COVID. And of course, that was opening a massive can of worms when it comes to regulatory compliance and standards. So we're working our way through things like ISO 13485, which for anybody here who knows ISO 9001, the quality management standard, think of that, but quadrupled, because it's that for medical device companies dealing with life-critical data and patient data. And so as a small company who don't have anybody who's a dedicated standards or regulatory person, we're all double-hatted. That's actually proving to be really challenging. And this is where working directly with BSI, for example, and I know it would be the same in Canada as SCC, has been invaluable, because they've been able to provide the guidance and help that we need on that journey, and to help us figure out just what it is we do need to do and in what order and where the priorities lie. So even before we think about AI-based standards, things like the quality management standard 13485 or 9001, 27001, as we said, there's a load of these what you might call foundational standards that are relevant whether or not you're getting involved with AI. And my earlier questions, when I said I was pleased and surprised at how many people were here for what you might call the positive reasons, rather than the carrot, rather than the stick. I'll be frank, we're doing stuff that we have to do rather than stuff that we want to do. But we have to do it. Getting on to the more AI relevant standards at the moment, even though we're an AI company, still falls in the want to do and haven't got there yet basket. But of course, that's all coming. When things like 42001, the quality management standard for AI is launched, we're going to have to be there. Now, that is my understanding of that standard, is that's not so much a standard aimed at a provider, it's more of a standard aimed at people using AI. I'm looking for validation and getting nods from Chantal here as you go. But we need to understand that, because we're going to be selling to companies and organizations who themselves don't really understand AI. So they will use standards as a safety blanket and a comfort blanket to a degree. And an easy one there will be saying, if ISO 42001 is a quality management standard for AI, we have to have it, especially the big companies and probably government agencies. So we're going to have to understand that standard and be able to ensure that whatever services and products we're offering are going to be able to be bought by somebody who is using that standard. So we're finding our way, and it's not easy. And there are some resources that we'll talk about at the end that can be really helpful whether you're a large or a small organization, for just helping to figure out this landscape. That's probably all I need to say at this point. We've got 20 minutes left of the session, and we would like to open it up to be interactive. Now, we haven't had a lot of interaction from you guys yet, apart from some hands going up and down, so I'm hoping that there will be some questions, and if there aren't, we are going to jump in and pose some, Pose, pause, pounce is apparently the way to do it as a teacher. You pose the question first, and you pause so everybody thinks, oh, he might pick me, and thinks of an answer, and then we pounce on someone. But before we do that, we've got 2 questions up here that you've all been looking at and subliminally thinking about while we've been talking, so you should already have some good answers to this. And I think that first one is probably one that's been a bit of a thread all the way through here. You know, micro, small, and medium companies don't have huge amount of internal resource and capacity to think about this kind of stuff, and there are various barriers to them. Is anybody willing to put their hand up and talk about, or even just say in a couple of sentences, the kind of barriers they've faced or perceive that they might face when it comes to facing this world? We do have a roving mic. Sorry, I don't know your name. Brian. Brian's on the mic, so don't leave poor Brian hanging. Is anybody willing to put their hand up and just talk, even just say a few words about any of the barriers that they've either have faced or that they perceive they might face when they start this journey? Or the lunchtime session. There we go, David. Go ahead, David. Wait for the mic.
So I came into BSI from an SME, and I've worked in many SMEs, some successful, some not. For me, Dan, I'm echoing what you're saying. You know, we're time poor. We don't have the skills necessarily that we need to engage in the standardization process, either from a writing standards or even implementing standards. One of the things, though, that I would have found very useful is firstly for the standards bodies to do the heavy lifting for me. I don't want to be sitting there wading through thousands of standards. I want to go to somebody who can tell me what I need to worry about. That's kind of the first thing. The second thing is tools. You know, we live in a digital age. It's all very sort of social media driven. Having the ability to sit at my desk and engage in a conversation via Teams or LinkedIn or whatever that might be would be more useful for me than having to go and sit on a committee. So I think you know what I guess the question is, what are we doing about that, and kind of what are we developing, and do we think that would help?
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? If not, I'm going to pick on somebody and ask them a question. And although he's just turned his back on me, I'm going to pick on the gentleman who waved earlier saying he has been involved in the standards making process. Could you just either tell us about that or engage with this? I don't mind which.
Yes, there are a couple of thoughts that I'm having. We're a small organization. We're 6 employees, so basically the same size than you are. And what we are struggling with is, with all the standardization, is the bureaucracy that is coming with it. And supporting what you are saying, you know, I want somebody to do it for me, because first of all, standardization for this small company that we are is a marketing tool. So if you put one of those standard logos on your website and you say, look, I'm standardized by this and this standard, it might be a competitive advantage. And this is the second thought that I'm having, going through the agenda of today's conference. Especially today's agenda, lots of talks are about a competitive advantage if you're complying to regulatory standards that are coming or are already out there. And my question would be to you guys on the panel is, what kind of standards you're seeing in AI that in company sizes like you and ours that are in consulting businesses, teaching people how to use AI, how to implement AI, what kind of standards we should look into to gain a competitive advantage, as we are a couple of months or maybe 1 or 2 years ahead of our competition because we're here. I'm part of masterminds in the world, like with 100, 200 or even 3,000 people involved in AI, and I can tell you nobody of those guys are in that conference. So maybe I'm in the wrong conference or I'm at the right conference and I'm ahead. So what do I need to implement? What would be your suggestion to stay ahead and maybe use that as a competitive advantage by applying standards that you're seeing?
I'm either going to ask Phil whether he wants to answer that, or whether we should throw that at SCC and BSI to answer.
Well, it would be interesting to see if we have the same answer.
Okay. Do you have a comment first, or?
Yeah, I'll comment first, and I'm kidding around. Yeah, that's a great question, and we ask ourselves that all the time. I would say, part of my job at Armilla is to think about this question, and I think you're a little bit ahead. And I think that's just the truth. I think a lot of companies, large companies, they're not thinking about which one standard they may yet require from a vendor, let's say. And I think they're all looking for, this is my perception, they're looking for what is going to be the AI equivalent to SOC 2? What is that one thing we just have to ask if you've done that? We don't have to think about this. This is, I think, what people are thinking about. And it's one of the reasons that at Armilla and many other companies at this point have begun to partner with an organization like the Responsible AI Institute, because they're trying to develop this one standard that they can also then embed other ISO standards as they emerge and gain currency, or as they become important for regulatory frameworks. So, I think there are some, let's say, front-runner assessments that look like this. Responsible AI Institute is one that has, been I think, being considered also by accreditation bodies out there. But to be honest, and I invite people to talk to Amanda more seriously about this. From what I hear, with businesses, like they don't have this level of specificity about which one. They're often if I could tell them, we're following ISO 42001, which actually wouldn't make any sense because that's a management system standard, and we're a small little company. But if they wouldn't know what this meant really, just yet. Big multinational companies do, right? Like the Microsofts, the Googles, companies that look like this, they know, because they've been in this game a long time at this point, with some of the other, industry, cybersecurity, others that we've been discussing. So I do see it as at this point for businesses, up until the EU legislation comes in, really, it is a marketing thing in a sense, but not purely in kind of the transactional nature of how that can sound, but in terms of proving the credibility, trust, at least that you're paying attention and that you know that these things out there exist. But I can't say to you that there is one ISO standard, let's say, or IEEE standard that is relevant. IEEE has a certification scheme. Responsible AI Institute has a certification scheme. There are these comprehensive attempts to encapsulate many of the considerations you might find in individual standards, but I haven't seen a consensus on which one we need to do. But generally, one of these is better than most of your other competitors at this point. That's at least how I see it today. Yeah.
Okay. That's probably. Oh, yes. Did you want to?
Yeah, I could just add maybe my thoughts. I think it's important to note that AI standardization is still in its infancy, and it's still an area that's developing. That's why we're doing the sandbox approach, where we are, even as an accreditation body and a national standards body, learning more and more about what's relevant and how do we incorporate other schemes other than the ISO in the context of the jurisdiction which we operate. So I think the question really is, what's important for your business? What's important? Which area do you want to operate? What's important for the regulators and your partners, et cetera? And build your standardization strategy around that, because every business is going to operate differently. So I don't know that there's a silver bullet answer to your question. It's a very good question, but I think it really has to be contextualized against the business model that you're operating with.
And I'd just add that AI is moving very quick. And that's probably the biggest challenge. But looking across all the standards that we get involved in with certification bodies, so 9,000, 14,000, 45,001, they all have this period of uncertainty. And And when it takes traction, when 27001 came in, first of all, we probably had about 3 certification bodies that were interested in it. All of a sudden, legislation is passed, and 27,000, I think we've got probably about 30 certification body now that we accredit for ISMS. So it is a challenge. I recognise it's a challenge. I would say try and get part of a stakeholder group, because I think Chantal said about getting involved, influencing, and I recognise smaller organisations have more of a challenge to send somebody off to a conference in Geneva to talk about 42,001. But there may be stakeholder groups within your jurisdiction that you can talk to, where you can at least have your say. You might not get your way, but at least you can have your say, and I think that's the way. 45,001 was in the UK the health and safety standard was a big discussion about that, whether it was actually something that was accepted as a consensus standard, and then you wouldn't think that those discussions went on anymore, because people see 45,001 the health and safety standard as a mainstream standard now.
That's probably a deeply unsatisfying answer to the question, but perhaps in terms of your initial question, it shows that you're early, which is not a bad thing, because you're in the room having the conversation. And as several people have said, you can influence that conversation. There are ways to influence the conversation. Are you guys based in Canada, or you're in Germany? Okay.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Yes. But we know. Yeah.
Okay, so Chantal, who, if you don't know, is the CEO of Standards Council Canada. So
I have some tips for you.
she will grab you. She will touch base with you afterwards and give you a private seminar. Is it worth, David, quickly mentioning gains? Do you think in that context, or I'm putting you on the spot?
Well, firstly, there was a question posed at the beginning. I think from Phil said, well, it'd be interesting to see what BSI and Standards Council Canada's view is the same. Yeah. Well, it is. So right answer. But, of course I'd say that. Of course I'd say that. Yes, you have put me on the spot, but thank you, Dan. You always do that. We can mention it. Gains, so what we're trying to do as national standards bodies is come together and collaborate more effectively around particularly standards, not just AI, but related to technology, because we're under increased pressure. It's you guys as SMEs are under pressure to obviously understand what standards you might need to follow and what's good and what's not good and what's relevant. However, we're also under pressure from our kind of peer groups and seniors, which tend to be government, saying, you need to keep up, you need to be faster, you need to support our industries quicker, you need to be more agile, all that kind of great stuff. So we're under pressure too, to be able to respond. So we're trying to come together to create our own kind of collaborations internationally, so countries coming together to be more agile and more effective on developing standards and standardization at an international level for our stakeholders. And our stakeholders are industry.
And to try to help this challenge of making sure you're not dealing with multiple standards in multiple countries.
Correct,
yeah?
Trying to help the chap here to try and sort of simplify things. And to make sure that we are doing the heavy lifting and there is one single place to go to be able to get those answers, because it is very complicated now. It's getting even more complicated. So we're trying to make that simple for organizations.
What does GAIN stand for again?
Global AI Network for Standards.
So there is this strong push to try to make sure that the various national standards bodies, and it might sound like that's kind of at odds with ISO. It's not. It's entirely complementary with ISO. But it's just trying to make sure we don't end up with too many different boxes that you have to tick. How do we align this in a way that works really well internationally, but while maintaining perhaps a bit more agility than we're used to? I
think we're also trying to make sure that we're aligned internationally from a national perspective, so we don't end up creating lots of specific national standards that a company in Germany might want to sell products in the UK and then finds the UK's got something completely different that it's got to be certified for 3 different things, a German thing, a European thing, a UK thing. Let's try and avoid that by making sure that if we are, as individual jurisdictions developing national derivative standards, they have international applicability, almost kind of like a passport. You can go anywhere with them because they conform to, principles that we're all agreeing at an international level. And AI is just the start, right? This is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as other new things come down the line, and we just need to make sure we're all on top of this.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. We've only got 5 minutes left. Before we sort of wrap up, perhaps do a bit of a summary and then signpost you to some potentially useful tools. Are there any other questions that somebody's been sitting on, desperate to stick their hand up, but have been shy to do so? No. Okay. Well, this is not going to be the first such event you guys attend. You are going to be attending more and more of these. As we said, this is an evolving area. And it's an area that, on one hand, it's evolving, the technology is evolving really fast. The public discourse is evolving fast. And then sometimes you'll get a left field thing like ChatGPT looks to the public like it's popped up out of nowhere. And suddenly AI is being talked about in places and by people who've never thought to talk about it before. And just as we were starting to get our heads around some of the ethical challenges, perhaps, suddenly here's some new ones that pop up. Who would have thought a few years ago that the art world and the authors and writers and the like of people would be the sort of people getting worried about AI plagiarizing their work, for example. I mean, some of this stuff wasn't even necessarily on people's ethical radar 5 years ago. So it's a really, really interesting area where what's happening on the ground is moving rapidly, but the standards and regulatory processes are not always well geared to move fast enough to keep up. And all of the standards bodies, national and international, are working to be more flexible, to move faster. In the UK, we've created Flex, which is a new approach to doing faster and more agile standards making. And I know that there's similar things happening elsewhere. And of course, ISO sits above it all, having to balance speed and agility and flexibility with maintaining that robust sense of governance and consensus. And that's not easy to do. So I'm afraid we're not up here promising you that by next year it will all be sorted out and you'll know the one standard to rule them all that you have to go with. I'm reminded I've got a cartoon on my wall at home where there's a conference like this and people say, there are 12 standards in this sector. And somebody in the audience says, that's ridiculous. Why don't we come up with something that incorporates all of that and simplifies this? And they work all year on it. And the speech of the next year says, there are now 13 standards in this sector. And sometimes it feels a bit like that. But we in the standards making world are doing our best to try to make it not only flexible and agile, but accessible. And if I left you with nothing else today, I think it would be, don't just view yourselves as passive recipients of the standards process. Because standards are by definition voluntary and consensus, which means they are by and for the users. And so do try to get involved. Every national standards body has its own way of getting involved. Do look for how to do that and how to get involved. Because if you don't get involved with making these standards, your competitors will be the ones doing it. Other people will be the ones doing it. And you kind of have no right to then complain if you don't like what they look like. Do you have any final thoughts, Phil?
Well, from that second question, this is more, I was just thinking my own answer to that second question. And it occurs to me that based on some of the feedback we've heard today, how can some of the standards bodies kind of do the work for SMEs? I think SEC, VSI, others I know are working on this. It occurred to me that this could be an interesting place for some innovator to apply generative AI technology to help consumers of standards query the hundreds of standards that are out there and help design strategies that could be, let's say verified by humans or whatever. But I think there's a lot of potential for innovation in that space. And then I guess the last comment that I would make, which is not so much about summing up, but is really that I still think this is, the last few years for me have been a bit of a slow burn watching AI standards landscape evolve. And I actually remember having a conversation with Chantal on a completely other topic related to something on AI, geopolitics and politics. And I said to her, I don't understand how this is going to work, Chantal. We're going to need, there's going to be a demand for several dozen standards. How is this going to move fast enough? How is it going to be coordinated with government policy? How are people going to know about this? This is like 2 or 3 years ago, or 2. And we've moved a little bit further along, but we're still kind of on, I think, the doorstep of the AI standards world exploding as an industry unto its own. And you see as you walk around, you're not even realizing this yet necessarily, but if you walk around the expo floor, you see dozens of companies who have technologies that are going to help operationalize this, so you don't have to think about standards, let's say. They'll do it, their technology does it, it's automated. That's already happening. You have the product testing, inspection, certification bodies now turning their heads to AI. Many of them are in Germany. They've been doing this forever. So there is a massive boom in this market that is about to happen. And that's going to be, I think, that's going to be very helpful in helping to address some of the concerns that have been raised today. And what we're trying to do is figure out how we could move this just a little bit faster and make it a little bit easier for people to use standards. So I'll just close with those comments, and thanks very much, everyone, for being here today.
Absolutely. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Do please scan this QR code, and it will take you to very useful resources. Also, we don't have a QR code for it, but it's worth writing down if you don't know AI Standards Hub. The AI Standards Hub is a collaborative organization by a number of UK bodies, but it's sort of international in nature, and it's effectively an observatory or a library that helps you identify a range of AI standards around the world. It's not a UK-focused tool. So the AI Standards Hub is worth looking at, and it's worth looking at this. And otherwise, I'd like to thank SCC and BSI for arranging this event. And they did stand up early. It's basically that table and that table. Do grab them afterwards, because they're the real experts. And don't forget the private tutorial that Chantal is going to give this gentleman afterwards. So a few other people might want to go and listen to that. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Where do I?